After Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle were found dead in their Los Angeles home last weekend, their 32-year-old son Nick was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The family tragedy unleashed waves of condolences and tributes from almost everyone who commented publicly. Tributes to his talent, political activism, and for their family. Rob Reiner joined me for an episode of Firing Line in 2019. We talked about his political activism and a lot more. Here's what Rob Reiner said then.
Firing Line with Margaret Hoover is made possible in part by Robert Granieri, Vanessa and Henry Cornell, the Fairweather Foundation, the Tepper Foundation, Peter and Mary Calico, Pritzker Military Foundation, Cliff and Laurel Asness, and by the following.
Rob Reiner, welcome to Firing Line.
Thanks for having me.
It's such a delight to be with you. You are an iconic film director of classic American films like Stand By Me and The Princess Bride and This Is Final Tap. And almost more germane to this conversation is the role you played as the son-in-law of Archie Bunker.
Yes.
On All in the Family.
Yes.
But you have gone on from your acting career and your directing to become a political activist. I met you first on a cause that maybe started as a liberal cause, but then became a bipartisan cause.
Right.
Where you worked very closely with conservative legal icon Ted Olson and liberal lion David Boies to challenge the constitutionality of Proposition 8 in California, which outlawed same-sex marriage.
Right. And that led to essentially making it the law of the land to allow for same-sex marriage. And I remember, when we had the first trial in San Francisco in the district court, you were there.
I sat next to you in federal district court.
Yeah, that's where we met. And it was an interesting, dichotomy between, as you say, David Boies and Ted Olson, because the way Ted Olson talked to me about it the first time I met him, and I even said to him when we first met, I said, you realize you put me in bed for 2 days in the Bush v. Gore argument because he was on the side of George Bush. And as it turned out, David Boies was on the side of Al Gore. And the fact that they teamed up basically took the politics out of the issue. And what he said to me is that he viewed marriage as a very conservative idea, that it is the bedrock of conservative principles, that a married couple should be allowed to, to be able to be together and to have a family. So that was, to me, an eye-opener.
It was an eye-opener hearing a conservative make a case for a value and ideal that you believed in.
Right.
And since then, have there been any opportunities to forge that kind of a bipartisan consensus on the political issues you've been involved in?
Well, I mean, obviously, the country is so divided now. It has been divided for a long, long time. I mean, there was a huge divide that started over the Vietnam War, and that divide has never closed. It has kept getting wider and wider, and I do believe that this last election in 2016, that divide was exploited. The Russians saw an opportunity where there was a huge divide and the addition of social media, which blew it up all out of proportion. And we have been in that place ever since. Now, can there be consensus? Of course there can. And what I've discovered, and it's kind of a weird thing, and Trump has done more, I think, to even divide us further, in that I've made a lot of Republican friends over this. People that I would not have normally talked to, like David Frum.
Republicans who are never Trumpers.
Well, they didn't start out as never Trumpers. Some of them did. Some of them then went like, what's going on here? I mean, David Frum and Stephen Schmidt and Max Boot and Nicole Wallace. And I mean, you go down the list and all of a sudden, these are not people that I would necessarily agree wholeheartedly on issues, but certainly they argue their point with a basis in fact. Patrick Moynihan said, you're entitled to your own opinions, not your own facts. At least there's a common basis of fact that you can discuss things with them. And I find that I've had I've had dialogues with a number of Republicans, and I've always said, you cannot have a healthy democracy unless you have a healthy Republican Party and a healthy Democratic Party, so that we can actually debate the ideas of where we are. I mean, we are a country of we are a capitalist nation, but we also have a lot of socialist programs inside the capitalist nation, and we have to find a way to balance those things. And the only way to do that is to have two parties arguing with a common set of facts.
So when you first played Meathead, as you were endearingly called by your father-in-law and All in the Family, I mean, you were the liberal son-in-law. He was the conservative father-in-law, and the divisions and the conflicts and the disagreements you had on the show in many ways parallel the same disagreements that we're having today. Let's look at a clip from All in the Family from the first moment you met Archie Bunker.
Let me tell you something, Mr. Bunker.
No, let me tell you something, Mr. Stivic. You are a meathead.
What did you call me?
A meathead, dead from the neck up. Meathead.
So you wrote that episode,
I
and
did.
That is where they first met.
That's it. That was a flashback to the first time Archie and Mike first meet.
And then they go on, and throughout the entire course of the run of the show, it's marked by these fractures in their worldview, which we're going to show a clip of. Here is.
Send me your poor, your deadbeats, you're filthy. And all the nations sent them in here. They come swarming in like ants. Your Spanish PRs from the Caribbean area. Your Jats, your Chinamen, your Crouch and your Hebes, and your English fans. All come in here, and they're all free to live in their own separate sections. That's what makes America great, buddy.
How germane is that to the current
Well,
debates
it's
that we're
exactly the argument we're having now. I mean, this is an argument that's as older than we are. I mean, you saw that happen in Nazi Germany in the 30s. We saw it happen in Brexit, where one side demonizes the other and then blames the other for their lot in life and tries to criminalize it. And that's what we're seeing right now.
You joined Twitter, it's been reported, to troll President Trump.
I was so technologically inept. I mean, I didn't email, I didn't do Twitter, I didn't do anything. My father was on Twitter long before I was on, and he's 97 now.
97?
He just turned 97, yeah, and he tweets every day. But my wife said, we've got to have a way to push back against Trump. And so I joined Twitter, and I started that, in 2016.
What was it about him then that caused you to take him seriously?
Well, I mean, it's the cult of celebrity. I mean, the Republicans are the ones who do wind up.
Right. I mean, the celebrity presidents we have
Ronald
been
Reagan was
Republicans.
a celebrity,
Ronald Reagan, Donald Trump.
And Donald Trump. I mean, and we've seen that happen, Arnold Schwarzenegger was a celebrity in California. People are enamored with celebrity. Personally, I didn't think he was going to win. I really didn't. My wife thought he was going to win, but I didn't think he was going to win. But I thought, I knew this guy. I mean, I knew his background.
Did you feel like you knew him because you knew him, or do you feel like you knew his voters because of the role you played and the time you spent with those ideas in All in the Family?
It's funny. I knew there was the disenfranchised white working class and many cases racist mindset in this country. I knew there was an undercurrent of racism, but I didn't know it was going to bubble to the surface like this.
Can I just ask you about that? I mean, do you ever de-link those two? That white working class, non-college educated voters have real economic grievances that are some cultural grievances that aren't racism or bigotry.
No, you're exactly right. It's not all. I mean, you can't say all Trump supporters are racist. That's not true. But there's a big chunk that are comfortable with him saying there are good people on both sides
or
of that.
are not uncomfortable enough.
Yeah, I mean, there were a number of Bernie Sanders supporters that wound up voting for Trump. So it's not clear cut in that way. But there were, a lot of factory workers who lost their jobs. and not because of any particular thing, except for the fact that you had technology replacing them. Not so much even the globalization, which is a part of it, sure, but not everything. And Trump, said, I'm going to bring those factory jobs back, and we're going to. And we knew that wasn't true. Everybody knew that wasn't true. And he's a huckster, and he's a great huckster. He's like the best snake oil salesman ever. I mean, he's a guy who can get up, lie his ass off, and people just believe it because of celebrity, they liked him on Celebrity Apprentice, or they don't care that he's lying. I don't know what it is. All I know is it's poisonous for this country because there's one thing to say 4 years of somebody. You can start derailing democracy in 4 years, but you get 8 years, and there's a real chance. There's no guarantee that democracy survives forever. There's no guarantee. It's just we're just people and laws. So if you destroy the structure and you destroy the laws, you can wind up with an autocracy, and that's where we're headed right now.
Well, let's talk about that because obviously the thing that distinguishes this country in our 242 years of history is that we are governed by laws,
right?
And the rule of law, and there does seem to be an alarmism, particularly from people who disagree with Trump, that our entire infrastructure of rule of law will unravel at the seat of one president.
I don't think it's necessarily the case, but I would put it to you this way.
Is that what you just said, though? I mean, that's what you're saying, is that we could lose everything.
Yes, and this is why I'm saying it. And I don't think it's going to happen. I do think that hopefully the institutions will hold. But right now, what you have is a president who is thumbing his nose at the rule of law by not allowing, whether it's his tax returns or people to, testify in front of Congress. Now, there are mechanisms to deal with that.
And are they working in your view?
Not yet. We'll have to see, because we are just a nation of laws. And who made the laws? People.
Right.
And if people can disrupt that legal system, then where are we?
But how much faith do you have?
And we're seeing that happen now.
Yeah, I mean, look, I understand the concern and the worry and the constant need to be vigilant. But are you optimistic that we will be able to retain those checks and balances, or are you concerned? I mean, it sounds like you're quite concerned.
I'm nervous about it. Benjamin Franklin said, "We're a republic if you can keep it. If you can keep it." And right now, we're being tested. We as a country are being tested whether or not we can keep it. But there's no guarantee. I mean, when you look at the sweet spot of any great civilization, it's usually 250 to 300 years. Yeah. We're coming up against that. So what we've seen in the recent 4 years is a sledgehammer to the institutions. And I talked to a lot of constitutional law experts, and many of them who said, they respected William Barr. He was an institutionalist, and that he was going to be, very, very down the middle with the rule of law. He hasn't done that. He hasn't done that yet. So my fear is that if we start destroying the Justice Department, who ultimately would hold the president accountable, and we don't have that, then we start really dismantling things.
And there are varying views about whether the Justice Department should be a check on the executive branch, of course. Well, it's really the Congress that should be.
It's not a check on the executive branch. The Congress is the check on the executive branch. But if the Congress shows criminality and it's referred to the Justice Department and they say no, then you have a situation
where...
the check
is the people.
Yeah.
The check is the people.
The check becomes the people, and that becomes 2020.
So where is Rob Reiner going to focus his energy?
Well, my energy is going to be focused on making sure that Trump doesn't serve another term. We cannot have that. And I'm not just as a Democrat, I'm as an American. I don't want to see American institution for good Republicans. I don't want to see the country destroyed. And the good Republicans that I talk to all the time are like, their hair's on fire. They don't understand why those people in Congress are in this cult where they're worried about their election. At a certain point, you got to say, I care more about this country than I do about my getting reelected.
How can you be a constructive force in the 2020 field? I mean, how do you see your role as
what I try to do, and it's going to be almost impossible because, you know, Joe Biden just got into the race, and what has to happen is Democrats have to coalesce.
Do you think that the Democratic primary process will yield the candidate who is best to beat Donald Trump?
I hope so, boy. I mean, I like Joe Biden for that. I like Joe Biden for that reason, because to me, one of the things you do get in many of the polls is what's the number one issue. I mean, we're talking about healthcare, the environment. Those are big issues, and economic issues. But beating Donald Trump is way at the top. You know, who has the ability to beat Donald Trump? And Joe Biden polls very high on that measure.
But at some point, the field has to narrow,
yes.
And it is clear that the energy on the left, on the Democratic side in the Democratic Party, is on the progressive left. That is really where
always is. And same thing with Republican primaries. If you look at Republicans, they go hard to the right, and then you have to swing to the middle for the general.
Well, that didn't happen on the Republican side in 2016. Instead, you got the hard right candidate who was the complete outsider from the field of conservatives.
But he wasn't the hard right candidate.
Well, you're right.
He wasn't the hard right candidate because the hard right candidate believes in international trade.
He disrupted what the mainstream conservative movement had heralded for, frankly, 5 decades. I mean, since William F. Buckley Jr. began this program in 1966. I want to play a clip for you from an early version of Firing Line where William F. Buckley Jr. was sitting here on the set talking about...
Is it like this?
Archie, yes, you're going to see him.
Are they sitting like
talking
this?
About your character.
Why did William F. Buckley always sit like this? He was always like this.
You wouldn't have directed him like that.
Why was he sitting like this?
Let's take a look at this clip.
Yeah, let's see if he's sitting like this.
Incidentally, Archie, the program that I used to watch when it was on Saturday is Archie Bunker.
Yes. Very good show.
Now, it's a hilarious... But Archie Bunker is the greatest anti-conservative ripoff in the history of modern offensives.
I agree with you.
I mean, you don't need Karl Marx. All you need is Archie Bunker.
Would make you
he's absolutely
radical,
despicable, but he's kind of endearing in a way.
Well, this is the...
Don't you go giving yourself assets. All conservatives are not endearing.
No. I say the remarkable thing about it is that in a hideous kind of a way, there's something endearing about
There's something endearing about him.
Archie is a horrible man.
There's something endearing about him, but his points of view are always held up to be absolutely preposterous, and not only that, mean.
He's a coward, a bully, a cheat.
He didn't like Archie.
He didn't like Archie because he didn't like that he made a stereotype of conservatives that he didn't like.
Right.
So my question for you is, now that you've been a political activist and a director and an actor, where do you think you have the most impact in terms of really affecting hearts and minds about particular issues?
Well, I think...
Is it directing, and is it in Hollywood?
No.
With the culture?
No.
Or is it actually in the nuts and bolts of politics?
There you go.
Really?
There you go. Because you know, films are an artistic expression, but changing the needle. I mean, All in the Family was on for 8 years. We were seen by 40 to 45 million people every week. We brought these issues up every week, and we were certainly part of the dialogue. You know, people talked about it. I mean, you didn't have TiVo and you didn't have DVR, so you had to watch a show. So everybody had that shared experience, and they were talking about it the next day. But it didn't change the way, you know, America went. It just... You
don't think it laid the foundation for certain legislation to get passed or to change attitudes, cultural attitudes?
Not really. It just was part of the dialogue. The only thing that, yes, you have to keep stoking the conversation, and that hopefully leads to something. But in order to get anything done, you really have to get under the hood in the nuts and bolts of public policy in order to get it passed.
What really reared its head in 2016 was the economic malaise that had affected so much of the country that isn't the part of the country that necessarily you or I or many people are from. The people have accused you of being a coastal elite. You're from New York and you live in Los Angeles.
All that garbage. And I actually had a government job for 7 years, in California. So, I mean, anyway, the point is the two most important issues that I care about is, one, the environment, because that's affect the whole planet, and two, the survival of democracy. Those are the two things I care about.
Well, look, the people who elected Donald Trump elected him right on this. I mean, the issue was a hollowed out Rust Belt, a hollowed out manufacturing based,
right.
An economy whose wages hadn't grown and had been stagnant for a decade, an entire generation of men who were, white, working class, non-college educated men who didn't feel that Washington was working for them.
Right. And now with new technology that we have, whether it's making broadband available for the whole country, whether it's factories that create solar panels, whether it's creating more wind farms, whatever it is, there's a new technology that will drive manufacturing, not coal plants and old technology that has been taken up with machines. So there's an opportunity for those people that have been left behind to re-engage in a different kind of economy and in a different kind of manufacturing.
So in those states that the Democrats need to win in 2020, Hollywood isn't particularly popular, necessarily. I mean, I don't know if Rob Reiner is the most successful messenger.
No, I'm not. I understand that, and I understand. Listen, I can't tell you how many times I get libtard, on my Twitter feed. I mean, I'm the libtard of the world, I get all that, and I understand that, I'm toxic in those ways for those people. But if anybody wants to spend any time actually talking about how policy can be affected, how it can be put together, I can sit and talk with them.
As you became more political and more of a political activist, from being an actor to being a director to then spending a lot of your own hard-earned resources on the political issues you cared about.
Yeah.
How did that impact your reputation in Hollywood?
Well, I think it didn't make it any worse for me in Hollywood. The only way it hurts me in Hollywood is when I put out certain kinds of films like Shock and Awe or films that I've done recently. People hate me. Half the country hates me for.
You mean the red states?
Yeah,
but in Hollywood they don't hate you.
Hollywood, they don't hate me, but they hate the fact that they don't make as much money. Hollywood is also, driven by finance.
Do your movies suffer in red states because you made them?
Oh yeah, sure. But the only thing that's good for me is I like making the movies, and I'm now 72 years old, so I mean. I just want to do the things I want to do. I enjoy doing it, and some people will like them, others won't, and I can't worry about that.
So the inverse is conservatives in Hollywood, right? So liberals maybe have a hard time in red states, and if there were an inverse of you, right? A hugely successful actor and director who then became a political activist, but on the conservative side of issues in Hollywood, how would their relationship with the industry have been different than yours?
Well, I think if they, the bottom line is the bottom line for Hollywood, which is financial. So if that person can make a lot of money for those Hollywood types, they'll be fine with it.
Do you really think it's all about the bottom line?
They may not be liked in the community.
Right, that's what
I mean, I have Jimmy Woods is somebody I've worked with, James Woods, and we're on completely opposite sides of the political spectrum, but you'd have to ask him if it hurts him in terms of getting hired. But I think somebody who's making the films, the director, producer, whatever, if they're making a lot of money, Hollywood doesn't care.
Do you think Hollywood is fair to conservatives?
Well, for the actor, maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Because that's just, you're just hiring somebody, you can hire another actor. But for the people who are in power to actually make the films, I don't think it matters. Don't think it matters.
As you look to 2020, what gives you hope?
Two things I think need to happen. One is Donald Trump. He has to be defeated, but he has to be defeated by a large margin. And then we have to see him held accountable in some way other than the ballot box. If it is determined that he committed crimes, I'd like to see him convicted, because if that doesn't happen, it basically paves the way for anybody to take stuff from foreign governments, hostile foreign governments, to line your pockets, to do whatever it is you want, and we don't want that in the president.
What you're saying is nobody should be above the law, including the president.
That's right. That's right. You can't even. This is way beyond Watergate.
Do you ever get accused of Trump derangement syndrome?
What, being deranged?
Or just being. I mean, you have tweeted more than 1,000 times.
A lot of tweets. A lot. All
about
negative
Donald
against Trump. Yeah.
Do you think you've changed anybody's mind?
Who knows? I don't believe I have changed many people's minds, but I believe there's two aspects to this. One is maybe you change a few people's minds around the margin. Probably not. What you do is you keep the people who are going to be engaged to get out there and vote.
Rob Reiner, thank you for being here. Thank you for being on Firing Line.
Thanks for having me.
Firing Line with Margaret Hoover is made possible in part by Robert Granieri, Vanessa and Henry Cornell, the Fairweather Foundation, the Tepper Foundation, Peter and Mary Calico, Pritzker Military Foundation, Cliff and Laurel Asness, and by the following.
You're watching PBS.